It was a regular Tuesday morning, and the house was alive with the usual chaos. The coffee machine hummed, my husband was in the kitchen making some half-hearted attempt at breakfast, and I was already juggling a dozen different tasks. A day in the life of a mom, right? But then my son, Jake, who had just turned 25, walked in. I had just finished my second cup of coffee when I felt that something was off. Jake wasn't exactly a kid anymore, but he still acted like one. Lately, it had felt like he was just hanging around the house more often. He'd quit his job a few months back, something about not feeling fulfilled. The last I checked, that didn't come with a paycheck, so now he'd been playing the "I'm trying to figure it out" card for far too long. He was living in the guest room, which, I'll be honest, was becoming a bit of a drag. But I didn't mind too much. I thought maybe this was a phase. Every generation goes through it, right? That morning, he walked in with his usual slouched shoulders and a look on his face that could only mean one thing. He was in trouble. Again. "Mom," he said, glancing over at me like I wasn't sitting right there, "I need to talk to you about something." I raised an eyebrow, feeling the gears in my brain starting to grind. "What now, Jake?" I asked, already bracing myself for the latest drama. He sighed, slumping onto the couch and sinking into the cushions like he was auditioning for the role of world's most defeated 25-year-old. "I've been thinking, I need you to stop hassling me about my life, seriously." I stared at him, blinked a few times, and then forced myself not to laugh. Was this guy for real? The same kid who used to ask for my help with every single thing in his life, from school projects to picking out his clothes, and now he was telling me to back off? Well, what do you want me to do? You live here, Jake. You still aren't paying your rent. Your car's in the shop for the third time in a month, and let's not even get started on your so-called career," I said, my patience slipping fast. His eyes widened, and before I knew it, he snapped back with the words that would change everything. "Shut up, Mom. You don't get it. Just shut up." For a second, I just stared at him, not sure whether to be shocked or utterly disgusted. It was the first time in his life he'd ever spoken to me like that. Disrespect dripping from every word. My chest tightened and my blood started to boil. I was no longer the mom he could take for granted. I'd been through too much to let him talk to me like that. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice cool but sharp, a warning in every syllable. I leaned forward on the couch, trying to process what had just happened. Jake stared at me, his face blank for a moment. Then he let out a deep sigh like I was the one causing all the trouble. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I couldn't even hear it. My mind was racing. No one talks to me like that. Not my son. Not anyone. "I'm sorry, what did you just say again?" This time quieter, but I knew what he'd said, and the anger was building inside me. My heart was pounding in my chest as I processed every word, every moment that led to this confrontation. It felt like the calm before a storm, and I could already hear the thunder rolling in the distance. I took a breath, steadied myself, and thought about what to do next. Then I had an idea, one I knew would shake him to his core. But what would I do next? How far was I willing to go to teach my son a lesson? Let's just say I wasn't going to play the helpless mom anymore. Not today. Jake's face was still frozen in disbelief, as if he had just realized he'd crossed a line, but still wasn't quite sure how far he'd gone. I didn't waste a second. The anger I was feeling wasn't just about what he said. It was about the cumulative weight of everything that had built up over the last few months. The constant laziness, the excuses, and the way he had zero respect for everything I had worked hard for. He didn't seem to care how hard my husband and I had fought to give him a better life. My eyes narrowed as I stood up slowly. I walked toward the kitchen, my mind already churning, plotting, and calculating. I wasn't about to let this moment slide, and I definitely wasn't about to let him disrespect me in my own house. "You know, Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady but failing miserably, "I've had enough. You want to shut me up? Fine, but that comes with consequences." Jake glanced at me, a flicker of concern crossing his face. It wasn't enough to make him back down, but it was a start. "Mom, calm down. I didn't mean—" "Don't tell me to calm down," I snapped, cutting him off mid-sentence. "You've been living here for months with no plan, no drive, and no respect for the people who have given you everything. Well, that ends now." I walked over to the kitchen counter, grabbed my phone, and typed in a few quick commands. A few taps later, I was staring at my bank account app. I clicked on the link that took me to the mortgage payments page. The total was right there in front of me, and just like that, I did something I hadn't even planned on doing until a moment ago. I froze for a second, my finger hovering over the screen. Then, with one final resolute tap, I hit the button to make the payment on Jake's mortgage. The mortgage that I had co-signed for him months earlier when he told me he was moving out and starting a new life. He'd said it was time for him to grow up, and I had supported him, thinking it would help him learn responsibility. But here we were. He wasn't growing up, he was running out of chances. As I hit confirm, I thought about the small things, the way he always left his dirty laundry in the hallway, the way he never said thank you for anything, and the way he expected us to cover his bills when he spent all his money on random things. This was his lesson, and it was going to sting hard. I slid my phone back into my pocket, turned around, and gave Jake my best mom knows best look. His eyes widened when he saw the look on my face. "Wait, what did you do?" "Oh, I did something you're going to regret," I said, my voice laced with icy calm. Jake's face went white and he shot up from the couch, his confusion turning into panic. "No, you didn't. You can't. You didn't just cancel my mortgage." "But I did." I watched him stumble backward as the realization hit him, and in that moment, I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't sure if I was bluffing, but I wasn't the kind of person who'd back down. I had crossed the line, sure, but sometimes crossing the line is the only way to make someone understand. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I didn't let him. "Don't even think about it. You've been riding on my coattails for way too long, Jake. I'm done." I could see the wheels turning in his head as the magnitude of what I'd done sank in. His mind was racing, looking for some way to get out of the hole I'd just dug for him. But this wasn't about fixing things. Not yet. This was about teaching him a lesson he'd never forget. He'd crossed a line, and now so had I. But Jake wasn't backing down either. He might have just realized the gravity of the situation, but what was coming next? The phone started buzzing in my pocket, and the incoming calls were rolling in faster than I can process. The phone vibrated loudly in my pocket, a constant buzz that seemed to echo through the entire room. I could tell from the look on Jake's face that he knew exactly what was coming. His expression went from shock to full-on panic in a matter of seconds, and I could see his mind racing, trying to figure out how he could somehow undo the mess I had just made. "Mom, what did you do?" Jake's voice wavered, the tone of panic creeping in. I didn't respond immediately. I stood there, letting the silence stretch out between us, watching his discomfort grow. He stood there frozen, staring at me like he couldn't quite comprehend that I'd actually done it. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. I wasn't sure if I had just made a huge mistake or a brilliant move. But either way, it felt good, really good. The buzzing continued. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and glanced at the screen. There were already 3 missed calls from the mortgage company. I could almost hear the confusion and disbelief on the other end as I tapped the screen and read the message notification. "Your mortgage payment has been canceled. We regret to inform you that the property will be placed into foreclosure proceedings." A cold chill ran down my spine. It was real. I had done it. Before I could think twice, I saw the phone number pop up again, this time as an incoming call. It was from the mortgage company. I looked at Jake, his face now pale, and I could feel a sense of vindication flood through me. This was his wake-up call. He was always used to me being the soft, caring mom who'd let him slide by. He thought he could get away with anything, but now he was going to learn the hard way. I swiped the screen to accept the call. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady but firm. "Ma'am, this is Allison from Capital Mortgage. I'm calling regarding your mortgage account. It looks like the payment was canceled." I bit my lip, not knowing if I should feel guilty or proud. "Yeah, I know. I just wanted to make sure you got that. I'm done. The mortgage is canceled and you can do whatever you need to do with it." There was a brief pause on the other end, probably a mixture of confusion and disbelief, just like I'd felt when I'd hit cancel. "Ma'am, are you sure about this? This isn't something we can just undo. You're at risk of losing the property." "I know what I'm doing," I replied, trying to sound as calm as possible. Inside, I was shaking a little, but I refused to let it show. "We're done here. Consider the payment canceled. I don't need the house anymore." As the words left my mouth, I could see Jake's face fall, his body visibly tense, like he was about to break down. He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off before he could even form a sentence. "Not one word, Jake, not one more word," I said sharply, never taking my eyes off him. I turned back to the phone call. "So, how soon will the proceedings begin?" I asked, my voice colder now. "What's the next step?" The woman on the other end sounded almost too professional, too polite, but I could hear a hint of disbelief in her tone. "The foreclosure process will take a few weeks to begin, ma'am. We'll send out a notice within the next 10 business days to officially start the legal procedures. But once that happens, the house will no longer be yours. You will lose it to the bank." Jake took a few steps forward, his hands clenched at his sides. I could see the fire in his eyes now. He was angry, but there was something else there too, fear. "Mom, are you really doing this?" he asked, his voice trembling. I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I let the woman on the other end finish explaining the process. As she spoke, my eyes never left Jake's face. His face was a mixture of disbelief and anger, and I could feel the tension in the air growing thicker. This wasn't how he thought this conversation was going to go. When the call ended, I hung up and turned back to face Jake. "You can go ahead and call whoever you want. You can scream and yell, but this is happening. You had your chance. You've wasted it." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but his words faltered. I could tell he was searching for some kind of defense, but nothing he said could change the fact that I had already taken control of the situation. Then my phone buzzed again. I picked it up and saw the name on the screen, 55 missed calls. I raised an eyebrow. "Well, would you look at that?" I said with a smirk. "Looks like the fun is just beginning." Jake's face turned ghostly white as he watched me tap the screen. The calls were coming in faster now, like a flood of frantic attempts to get through. The reality of what I had just done was sinking in for both of us. But what happens when those 55 missed calls are from people he's counting on? Will anyone come to his rescue, or was I about to watch him crumble under the weight of his own choices? The phone buzzed again, louder this time, almost as if it were screaming at me to answer it. I glanced at the screen. 55 missed calls. I didn't need to check the list to know who most of them were from. The usual suspects, his friends, a couple of his old co-workers, and of course, his girlfriend, Rachel, who I suspected was always just one step behind the drama. I swiped my finger across the screen and held it to my ear. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" It was Jake's voice, coming from the other end, panic lacing his words. He must have been pacing because I could hear his footsteps in the background, a constant shuffle. I leaned back against the counter, folding my arms. "What's the problem, Jake? I thought you were a grown-up. Don't you have everything under control? You've got your own house, right?" I could practically hear him cringe on the other side of the line. "Are you seriously going to hold that over my head? You know I was figuring it out." His voice was sharp, but it didn't carry the confidence it usually did. He sounded small now, like a child caught in the act. "No, Jake, you weren't figuring anything out. You've been lounging around here acting like the world owes you something. You've been letting everything slip through your fingers, and I'm done. I'm tired of cleaning up your messes," I said, my voice finally breaking through the cool facade I'd been holding up. I was still furious, but now I could feel the smallest hint of satisfaction bubbling under the surface. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I can't believe you do this. What about the house? What about everything I've been trying to build?" Jake always had a knack for trying to make things sound bigger than they were. What he was building was a house of cards, and it was falling apart right in front of him. "Your house? The one you couldn't even manage to keep afloat for 6 months? Yeah, Jake, I'd say that ship has sailed," I replied, not missing a beat. I could feel his frustration reaching its peak, the way his breathing picked up. "This isn't over, Mom. You'll regret this." I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't about to back down. What could he possibly say now? I had just pulled the rug out from under him, and I wasn't sorry. Instead of answering, I hung up the phone. For a moment, I stood there in the kitchen, taking in the silence. It was almost too quiet after the chaos I'd just unleashed. Jake would be fine. He'd had to be. But then again, maybe he wouldn't be fine. Maybe this would finally snap him out of his lazy, entitled attitude and make him grow up. Or maybe it would push him to go even further down the spiral. I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care. I had my own life to worry about. The things I had built weren't for him to tear down. As I turned to walk out of the kitchen, I felt my phone buzz again in my pocket. One glance at the screen told me it was another incoming call. This time it was Rachel. I knew she wasn't going to let Jake hang out to dry. She'd always been there to pick up the pieces when he messed up. She might have been the only one who still believed in his potential, whatever that was. I wasn't in the mood to listen to her pleading, so I silenced the call and slid the phone back in my pocket. I needed a moment to breathe. But the missed calls kept coming. By the time I sat down on the couch, I had already ignored another dozen calls. The vibration felt relentless, like Jake was on the other end of the phone just waiting for me to pick up and apologize. But that wasn't going to happen. Not today. Not after everything. A part of me, a tiny sliver, almost felt bad for him. I'd been in his shoes once. Everyone goes through a phase where they feel lost, confused, and unsure, but that wasn't an excuse for his behavior. He had made his choices, and now he was going to have to deal with the consequences. The world wasn't going to wait for him to get his act together. But that sliver of sympathy quickly vanished when I remembered the call I had just had with the mortgage company. There were more missed calls from them, too. The finality of what I had just done was sinking in, and the thought that I might have just caused my son to lose everything hit me hard. But then again, that's what this was about. Losing everything could be the wake-up call he needed. He'd never learn to stand on his own 2 feet if I kept carrying him. A loud knock at the door startled me out of my thoughts. It was so forceful, I was half expecting it to break down the door. I stood up, heart racing a little, and walked cautiously toward the door. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to steady my voice. "Mom, open up!" It was Jake's voice. He was angry, desperate. I could hear him banging on the door now, louder, more frantic with each hit. The pounding on the door didn't stop, but what was Jake going to do next? Was he going to beg, or was this the moment when everything truly fell apart? The knocking on the door didn't stop. It was relentless, louder and faster, each bang more desperate than the last. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my mind racing with the consequences of what I had done. What had started as a clear-cut decision now felt like a pressure cooker about to blow its top. "Mom, please open the door." Jake's voice broke through my thoughts, raw with panic. "I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Please." I took a slow, steady breath. There it was, the apology, the desperation. He was trying to fix it now, after everything. He was scrambling, but it was too late for that. I wasn't going to let him weasel his way out of this one. Still, I couldn't just stand there and ignore him. I walked over to the door, my hand resting on the handle, but not quite turning it. I wanted to open the door. I wanted to let him in and tell him it would be all right, that I'd take care of him like I always did. But that would be the same old cycle, and I was done with that, done with fixing his mistakes, done with cleaning up his messes. So I took a step back and called out to him instead, my voice steady but firm. Jake, you need to understand something. You've been given every opportunity. I've done everything I can to help you. But this ends today. There was a long pause on the other side of the door. Then I heard him muttering, his voice cracking. I know, but I'm really trying. I'm trying to figure things out. I swear I'll do better. Please. His words hit me harder than I expected. For a split second, I almost believed him. For a moment, I wondered if I was being too harsh. Maybe he really was trying. But then I remembered everything that had led to this point. The months of empty promises, the lies, the excuses. He had every chance to prove himself, and he had wasted it. Jake, I called, my voice a little softer now. You don't get to just say you'll do better. You have to show it. You have to take responsibility for yourself. You can't keep running back to me every time you screw up. He knocked again, this time softer, more pleading. Please, Mom, I can't lose everything. Not the house, not now. I couldn't hold back the cold laugh that slipped out. You've already lost everything, Jake. You just didn't realize it until now. He fell silent for a moment, and I could practically hear the realization sink in. The house wasn't just some structure. It was everything he'd based his entire identity on. It was his escape from responsibility, his way of proving that he could handle life on his own. But now the illusion was shattered. His future was hanging by a thread, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. He had to face this on his own. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension, until Jake spoke again, his voice barely audible. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. My heart twisted a little at the sound of his brokenness. I wanted to let him in. I wanted to tell him everything would be all right, that we'd figure it out together. But I couldn't. I needed him to figure it out on his own. I needed him to take responsibility for the mess he'd made and stop relying on me to bail him out every time things got tough. Jake, I called, my voice steady once more. You'll figure it out, Jake. You always do. You've got to grow up and face your problems. I can't do that for you anymore. Another long silence. Then I heard him shuffle away from the door, his footsteps slow and heavy. The sound of him leaving felt like a finality, like something that had been building for a long time had finally reached its breaking point. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence settle in. The house felt quieter now, emptier somehow, and for a brief moment I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice. But then I reminded myself this was the only choice. He had to learn. He had to grow up. If he didn't, then the consequences would catch up to him eventually. I turned away from the door and walked back into the living room, collapsing on the couch. The weight of the decision, of what I had just set in motion, finally hit me. But I knew I couldn't go back. I had done what I had to do. I had given him the push he needed, whether he realized it or not. The phone buzzed again. Another missed call. This time it was from Rachel. I didn't even bother answering. As I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder what Jake would do now. Would he keep fighting? Would he crumble? I had no idea. All I knew was that I couldn't be the one to save him anymore. And just like that, the silence settled in. But what happened next? Would Jake pick himself up, or was this the moment he fell apart for good? The house was quiet, almost unnervingly so. It was the kind of silence that weighed on you, making every minute feel like an eternity. I could still hear Jake's footsteps echoing in my mind, fading away as he left. It wasn't the closure I expected, but somehow it was still real. There was no going back now. I sat on the couch, my mind reeling with everything that had happened. Was I really doing the right thing? I mean, I knew I had to stop enabling him. He wasn't a kid anymore. He was a grown man who had to face the consequences of his own choices. But the thought of him out there, possibly on his own, was enough to give me a pang of guilt. I'd done so much for him, and now I'd basically kicked him out. Even if he deserved it, was it too harsh? My phone buzzed again, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Another call from Rachel. Of course. She was probably going to plead with me to fix things. She'd always been Jake's buffer, the one who'd clean up his messes when things went south. But I wasn't in the mood for her excuses. I silenced the phone and tossed it on the coffee table. If she couldn't see it, then maybe she'd start to understand where I was coming from, too. I got up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtains slightly to look outside. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, nothing to suggest the storm that had just swept through my house. I watched the world outside, thinking about what Jake was doing right now. Was he walking aimlessly, wondering what came next? Was he sitting in his car, trying to figure out how to face reality? Then I heard the faint sound of an engine revving. I turned my head toward the sound, but it was too far in the distance to really make out the source. I tried to shake off the anxiety creeping up my spine. The consequences of my actions were already in motion. No use worrying now. I went back to the couch and picked up the remote, trying to focus on the television, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Jake. I hadn't heard the last of this. He wasn't going to let it go that easily. If anything, he was probably angry enough to do something rash. I didn't want to think about what that might mean, but the reality of it was there, hanging in the air like an unspoken threat. Then the doorbell rang. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Who could it be now? I wasn't expecting anyone. I stood up slowly, my thoughts racing. Was it Jake? Had he come back, this time more determined to get what he wanted? Or was it someone else? Rachel, maybe. Or even someone from the mortgage company? I hesitated, not sure what to do. Should I open the door, or should I just let them leave, like I had done with Jake? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I walked to the door, and before I even touched the handle, I knew something was different. There was a heaviness to the air, a weight that I couldn't shake. I opened the door. Standing there on the other side was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a suit, his face expressionless as he looked at me. He held up a clipboard, the words "legal documents" printed across the top. "Ma'am," he asked, his voice cold and professional, "I'm here to serve you with a notice of foreclosure proceedings. Your mortgage has been officially canceled, and the property will be reclaimed by the bank within the next 30 days. I felt the blood drain from my face as the words hit me. I had already known what I had set in motion, but hearing it from someone else, someone who didn't care about the emotions or consequences of the situation, made it real in a way I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't sure what to say. The words stuck in my throat, as though my body was rejecting the gravity of it all. I swallowed hard and nodded. I understand," I managed to say, the coldness of the words like ice in my mouth. The man didn't respond. He just handed me the papers and turned to leave. But before he could walk away, I spoke. "Wait," I called out, my voice soft but firm. "Are you sure about this? I mean, I've got time, right? You can't just take the house like that." The man paused and turned back toward me. His eyes were cold, unfeeling. "I'm just the messenger, ma'am. The bank has decided to move forward with the foreclosure process. I'm afraid there's nothing I can do." As he walked away, I closed the door behind me and stood there in silence, staring at the papers in my hands. Foreclosure. It was happening, and there was no going back now. I couldn't help but feel a rush of fear and doubt. Had I made the right choice? Sure, Jake needed a wake-up call, but now I was realizing just how far-reaching the consequences were. The bank was taking control. This wasn't just about a house. It was about everything that Jake thought he had, everything he'd convinced himself he could have if he kept making excuses. And now it was slipping through his fingers. But was this really the end of Jake's story? Or was this just the beginning of something much bigger? The pressure was mounting, and Jake had a choice to make. But would he make it, or would he let everything slip away? The clock ticked away the minutes, but I couldn't focus on anything except the weight of the papers in my hands. It felt like I was holding the last remnants of something I couldn't take back. The reality of it all was settling in, sinking deeper with every second. The house was going, Jake was crashing, and I was somewhere in between, trying to convince myself that I'd done the right thing. The knock on the door earlier had thrown me off, but it wasn't the only thing on my mind. The missed calls, the pressure from the mortgage company, and the way Jake had looked when he realized the rug had been pulled out from under him. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control, and there was no stopping it now. I walked back to the kitchen, trying to distract myself by grabbing a glass of water, but my hand was shaking as I reached for the cup. I wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline still coursing through me or the realization that I'd just forced my own son to face something far bigger than himself. A loud bang echoed from the front porch. I froze, glass in hand. I wasn't sure if my nerves were playing tricks on me, but it sounded like something had hit the door. I set the glass down and slowly approached the front window, peering through the blinds. My heart skipped when I saw Jake standing on the porch, his face contorted with anger. He was pacing back and forth, his hands in the air like he was arguing with someone, or with himself. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was it. The storm I had seen coming was finally here. I had pushed him too far, and now there was no turning back. The clock ticked away the minutes, but I couldn't focus on anything except the weight of the papers in my hands. It felt like I was holding the last remnants of something I couldn't take back. The reality of it all was settling in, sinking deeper with every second. The house was going, Jake was crashing, and I was somewhere in between, trying to convince myself that I'd done the right thing. The knock on the door earlier had thrown me off, but it wasn't the only thing on my mind. The missed calls, the pressure from the mortgage company, and the way Jake had looked when he realized the rug had been pulled out from under him. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control, and there was no stopping it now. I walked back to the kitchen, trying to distract myself by grabbing a glass of water, but my hand was shaking as I reached for the cup. I wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline still coursing through me or the realization that I'd just forced my own son to face something far bigger than himself. A loud bang echoed from the front porch. I froze, glass in hand. I wasn't sure if my nerves were playing tricks on me, but it sounded like something had hit the door. I set the glass down and slowly approached the front window, peering through the blinds. My heart skipped when I saw Jake standing on the porch, his face contorted with anger. He was pacing back and forth, his hands in the air like he was arguing with someone, or with himself. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was it. The storm I had seen coming was finally here. I had pushed him too far, and now there was no turning back. Was he going to blow up at me? Beg me to fix things? I grabbed my phone, half expecting a barrage of texts or calls from Rachel, but there was nothing, not a single message. I wasn't sure if that was a relief or another layer of pressure building. Then the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, insistent, like a battle cry. I walked to the door slowly, my hand hovering over the handle. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I knew it was going to change everything. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped back to let Jake in. He didn't waste time. Without a word, he barged in, slamming the door behind him with a force that made me jump. His eyes were wild, like a storm was brewing inside him, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he erupted. "Why the hell did you do this?" he spat, his voice cracking with rage. "You think I deserve this? You really think I deserve to lose everything?" I didn't flinch. I stood there, meeting his eyes. "I'm not here to justify myself, Jake. You've made your choices, and this is where they've led you. You can't keep expecting me to bail you out every time things get tough." Jake clenched his fists, his breathing coming in short, sharp bursts. I could see the anger rolling off him like a wave, but behind it, there was something else, something more vulnerable. He was scared. He was terrified of losing control, of losing his place in the world. "You've ruined my life," he yelled, his voice rising. "I was building something. I was trying to do something on my own, and you've just—" He cut himself off, swallowing hard. I stood there, letting his words hit me. They weren't new. I'd heard them before, but now they felt different, more desperate, more real. He wasn't angry at me for what I did. He was angry at himself for never getting it right. And I realized, with a sickening twist in my stomach, that maybe I had just opened the floodgates. "Building something," I said, keeping my voice calm, even though inside I was screaming. "You weren't building anything, Jake. You were putting off responsibility, hoping someone else would come to the rescue when it all fell apart. And now it has." He stood there, breathing heavily, his face flushed with frustration. For a moment, I thought he might explode, his anger consuming him completely. But then his shoulders slumped, and he let out a long, shaky breath. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it," he muttered, his voice barely audible. I watched him for a moment, trying to understand where he was coming from. "I knew. You didn't," I said softly. "But sometimes we have to face the consequences of our actions, Jake. You can't keep running from them." There was a long silence, thick and suffocating. I could feel the tension between us, like a wall that had been slowly built up over time, brick by brick, and now it was about to come crashing down. Neither of us knew what to say next. Jake finally broke the silence. "So what now?" he asked, his voice small, almost defeated. "What happens now?" I looked at him, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. "You figure it out. You don't get to blame me anymore. You've got to stand up on your own, Jake. This is your life. I can't live it for you." He stared at me for a long time, his eyes searching mine, looking for some kind of reprieve, some kind of answer that would give him a way out. But there was nothing. I had done everything I could. Now it was his turn. And as the silence settled between us again, I realized that this was it, the moment that would either break him or make him. The lesson I had forced upon him was the hardest kind, the kind that didn't come with an easy fix. It was time to see who Jake really was underneath all the excuses, underneath the anger. But would he rise to the challenge,
Or would this be the moment that shattered him completely? Only time would tell.
The silence was suffocating. Jake stood in the middle of the room, looking like someone who had just been hit with the realization that everything he'd worked for, everything he thought he was building, was crumbling. He was frozen, unsure of what to do next. His eyes darted around the room, but there was nowhere to go. He was stuck, just like the rest of us. For the first time in a long time, I could see the vulnerability beneath his anger, the fear that had always been there, hiding behind his bravado. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I could feel the weight of it. He wasn't angry at me anymore, at least not in the same way. Now he was just lost. I crossed my arms, waiting for him to make the next move. It felt like the world was holding its breath. "You're right," Jake said after what felt like an eternity. His voice was quiet now, resigned, but there was something in it I hadn't expected. Acceptance. "I screwed up. I've been screwing up for months. You gave me everything, and I just kept throwing it away." I nodded, not sure how to respond. My heart ached for him, but I couldn't go soft on him. He had to face this. He walked slowly toward the couch and sat down, rubbing his hands over his face. The anger had completely drained out of him, replaced with exhaustion. "I don't know what to do," he whispered more to himself than to me. "I don't know where to start." I stood there for a moment, watching him, feeling the weight of the situation press down on both of us. The boy who had once needed my help for everything now needed me more than ever, but not in the way I used to help him. This wasn't about cleaning up his messes anymore. This was about him taking responsibility for himself. "You start by figuring it out," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've got no choice now, Jake. You've been running from this for so long, but you can't keep running. You've got to deal with it. You can't hide from reality anymore." He stared at the floor, nodding slowly, as if the weight of my words was finally starting to sink in. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time in a long time, I saw him look truly defeated. "I know," he muttered, "but where do I even begin?" I hesitated, trying to find the right words. The truth was, I didn't have all the answers for him. I couldn't fix this. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could help him understand what needed to be done. He had to take that first step on his own. "You figure out what's next for you. Get a job. Get back on your feet. If you want the house, you'll have to fight for it, but don't expect anyone to just hand it to you. You've got to earn it. The world doesn't owe you anything, Jake." He nodded again, this time more decisively. "I get it. I do. I've just been so damn lost." "You won't be forever," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing him or myself. "But you've got to make the choice. If you're not willing to fight for yourself, then you're going to lose it all. Everything." Jake was silent for a long time, staring at the floor, his hands clenched in his lap. It was hard to watch him like this. He wasn't the same cocky, defiant kid he had been just a few months ago. He had he had earned the loss, and now he was faced with the reality of standing on his own. "Mom," he looked up at me, his eyes red and tired. "What if I can't do it?" I took a deep breath, my heart aching. "Then you keep trying. You don't give up, but you don't get to play the victim anymore. I'm not going to fix it for you. You have to do this yourself." I didn't wait for him to answer. I didn't have to. He already knew what the next step was. There was no magic fix, no easy way out. This was the long road ahead, and it was his to walk, whether he was ready for it or not. The silence stretched on, but this time it wasn't filled with anger or frustration. It was the kind of silence that comes before something shifts, before something changes. It wasn't a happy silence, but it was honest. I stood up and walked toward the door. "You've got this," I said, my voice low but steady. "Now do something with it." I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't need to. The conversation was over for now. I had given him the tools. It was up to him to use them. As I opened the door and stepped outside, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders just a little. I wasn't sure where Jake's journey would take him, but I knew one thing. He was finally going to have to face it head on. I took one last look at the door, hearing the faint sound of his footsteps behind me before I walked away. He wasn't the same person he'd been when he walked in this house, and maybe, just maybe, that was the point. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy for Jake. The hardest battles were yet to come. Could he rise from this, or would the weight of his choices drag him down? Only time would tell. The weeks that followed felt like a slow, painful march. It wasn't easy, not for Jake or for me. I watched from a distance, not intervening, not offering help unless he asked for it. He had to make this journey on his own. Jake took a job at a local car shop. Nothing fancy, but it was a start. The first week was rough. He would come home late, his clothes covered in grease, his face tired. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but there was something else there, too. A spark, a determination he hadn't had before. He was fighting, not for me, not for anyone else, but for himself. I didn't push him. I didn't offer advice unless he asked. And when he did, I gave him the hard truths, the ones he needed to hear. He started cutting back on his old habits, the late nights out, the spending on things he didn't need. He didn't have much, but he was starting to build something again, piece by piece. It wasn't just about the house anymore. That was a part of it, sure, but Jake had learned the most valuable lesson of all. He had to rely on himself, and that was more than just a roof over his head. It was his own strength, his own will to keep going. One evening, about a month after I'd kicked him out, Jake came home earlier than usual. He was holding something in his hands, a small, crumpled envelope. He stood in the doorway, looking unsure of himself. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but steady, I made the first payment." I froze for a moment. "What?" "The mortgage payment," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "I've been saving up, and I'm going to get this place back. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to fix it." I felt a rush of pride and relief flood through me. He was doing it. He was fighting for his future, and that was all I ever wanted for him. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But you've got to keep fighting, Jake. Don't stop now." He nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I won't." And just like that, the chapter I thought was closed began to open again. Jake had faced his demons, hit rock bottom, and risen from it. The future was no longer uncertain. It was his to shape, and this time he was ready to do it on his own terms. Final thought. The hardest lessons are often the ones we don't want to learn, but they're also the ones that shape us into who we're meant to be. Jake's journey wasn't easy, it wasn't smooth, but it was his. And sometimes that's all we really need, to face the challenges head on and grow from them. To all the parents out there, remember, sometimes the toughest love is the one that saves. Let your kids fall, let them stumble, but never let them stay down. Help them rise when they're ready. They will thank you for it in the end. If you've ever faced a tough decision as a parent or watched someone close to you go through a journey of growth and change, share your story with us. Comment below or reach out to us. Sometimes the hardest moments in life lead to the most rewarding transformations. Keep the conversation going.